Today we're going to talk about animal diversity. And we're going to talk about how we group things, first of all, because we've got to make some sense out of this diversity of organisms in the world. We've talked before about this system of organization we have. It is entirely a human construct. Nature doesn't really respect these boundaries at all. These are just categories that humans have created to try to make sense of the organisms and the evolutionary relationships among organisms. So, Animalia is one of the kingdoms. You remember there are three domains, four kingdoms, and then the protists, which is our other sort of catch-all group. And Kingdom Animalia is divided into a bunch of different phyla. You remember that's the plural of phylum. And then classes, orders, family, genera, and species. And within each group, organisms have a shared evolutionary history, which we see in their shared characteristics. So what we're going to talk about today is what those shared characteristics are and what characteristics we can expect for each group. So here's our current system of classification. Again, we've already talked about this, but hopefully you remember it. Domain is the largest group. Within the three domains, there are four kingdoms, and then Protus, which is not a kingdom anymore and being resolved. Within kingdoms, there are phyla. Within phyla, there are classes. Within classes, orders. Within orders, families. Within families, genera, which is the plural of genus. And then many species within each genus, usually. So you're going to remember the order with either this mnemonic, do keep potato chips out for good snacks, or do kinky people come over for good sex? Either one works. Just make sure you can list these on the exam. All right, so characteristics of animals, they are all heterotrophic. Hetero, of course, means other. Trophic means feeding or eating. And so heterotrophic means they eat other things. So all animals are going to eat other organisms. This is the opposite of autotrophic, which of course means self-eat, and that's what photosynthetic organisms, such as plants, do. They make their own food and then consume those sugars that they have made through photosynthesis. To clarify, they have made the sugars through photosynthesis, then they consume them. All animals have tissues, which are groups of cells specialized for certain functions, except one of the first groups we're going to talk. The first group we talk about, and I'll come back to that. For example, fat tissue is a bunch of cells specialized for storing energy. Within the lining of the larynx in animals that breathe air, we see a lot of tissues. For example, this surface layer of tissues has a layer of mucus that traps dust. And then there's also back here cartilage to keep those airways open. That's the larynx in your body. And then in organisms that have an interior skeleton like ours, we have compact bone, which is hard tissue, hard bone tissue. It's an outer layer around all of our bones. So we have different cells working together to do a certain function that gives us a tissue. Now, as we group organisms together, like I said, we are going to group them together ultimately by their evolutionary relationships, but this evolutionary relationship is seen through the shared characteristics. So the first of those is, what kind of symmetry does the organism have? Some organisms don't have any. An amoeba, which is not actually an animal, it's a protist, but it doesn't have any symmetry. It is asymmetrical. Most of the things that we think of as animals have bilateral symmetry, meaning that the right and left sides are mirror images of each other. Yes, little baby elephants can hop, and yes, it is the cutest thing in the whole wide world. But back to bilateral symmetry. If you draw a line down the middle of the organism from head to foot, then you get right and left sides that are mirror images of each other. And then the other kind of symmetry that exists in nature is what we call radial symmetry. So we see that in sea stars, sea urchins, sea anemones. And the symmetry is around a central axis. So, for example, this sea star has pentaradial symmetry, meaning that there are 5 parts of the body that radiate evenly around this central axis. These sea stars also have pentaradial symmetry, but they can bend their legs, so they don't look quite so symmetrical, but they do have it. And if you straighten out those legs, all of the legs are the same. Sea anemones don't have pentaradial symmetry, they just have radial symmetry. So you can draw an imaginary line through the central axis anywhere on their bodies and create mirror image halves. Now, it's important to say that you can, if you draw a line anywhere through the central axis, you create mirror image halves. Students sometimes try to simplify and say you could draw a line anywhere to create mirror image halves, and obviously that wouldn't be correct. If you drew your line, say here, you'd get one small half and one big half, and that would not be symmetry. Okay, so we got asymmetry, bilateral symmetry, and radial symmetry. Another thing we see in most animals is what we call cephalization, which is sensory organs and the central control of the nervous system centralized at one end of the organism that we call the head. Cephalization means head, the creation of a head. So a dolphin has a head, butterfly has a head, lizard, iguana has a head, and this is a little tiny flatworm that also has a little head with sensory organs on that head. Now, not everything has a head. All of these organisms with radial symmetry, they don't have a head. Again, everything is organized around a center, and the sensory organs in these organisms tend to be around the outside, not at some central head location. The other is the digestive system. And we have two types of digestive systems. Anemones have a cup-like digestive system, which is where there's one hole that opens into a pocket where they digest their food, and then after the food is digested, the waste exits through the same hole. So the one opening is the mouth and the anus. Sea stars are actually far, far more complicated. They have a tube-like digestive system. So they have a mouth on the bottom of the sea star. So this right here is like one of these sections here. Oops, sorry, this one. That one's got the digestive system. And the mouth is on the bottom in the central disc of the body. It's got a stomach called the cardiac stomach because the heart is around it. And then the anus is here at the top, so their waste is actually going to be excreted there at the top of the organism in that central disc. So each group has common characteristics for how it gets around, either legs or wings or fins. Marine mammals, like the dolphins, are descended from organisms with 4 legs. And we've talked before about how the bone structure in their flippers is actually like a leg. Anyway, things in a group are going to have a similar way of moving around. For example, the octopus that uses these suckers on its legs to grab onto things and pull itself around. And yes, even clams can move around. They actually have what we call a muscular foot that they can extend out of their shell to dig down into the sand. And some of them can actually clap their shells open and closed to move and swim by jet propulsion. Structural support. Some organisms have an internal skeleton, some have an external skeleton, some make their own shell, like these, and some don't have any skeleton at all except water-filled cavities. Nervous system, Again, do we have a nerve net? That's what we're going to see in an anemone. Do we have a central brain with nerves extending out from it, or do we have several brains? And yes, we are going to see some organisms that have multiple brains. All right, so we're going to start with the simplest organisms. Those are the sponges and the cnidarians. So the sponges, notice, are the outgroup on this phylogenetic tree here. And they are the simplest animals on the planet. And yes, SpongeBob is a marine sponge. This is what sponges look like in the wild. Not exactly like SpongeBob. If you've ever used a natural sea sponge to wash with, that was at one time an actual organism. That is the body of the sea sponge. Sponges do not have symmetry. Even though these tubes look like they are symmetrical, not all sponges make symmetrical tubes. Some of them are really asymmetrical. And this is the only animal that doesn't have tissues. They're actually made up of cells that have distinct jobs, but each cell is working independently. They're not organized together in tissues. So let's see a video so you can see how sponges feed and see that they are in fact animals that do feed on other organisms, not plants.
If a sponge is indeed an animal, it must eat to survive. How does it feed itself when it has no obvious mouth?
A sponge is actually a fantastic pump, which requires an incredible coordination of cells to function. It's a living filtering machine. It lives by soaking in water and filtering out food particles.
These seemingly motionless creatures are working extremely hard in order to feed.
Imagine that to get an ounce of food, a sponge has to pump over a ton of water through itself. Now, can you imagine doing that yourself? Drinking a ton of water to get an ounce of food to your body?
Diaz has studied sponges for decades, yet she has never seen them feed in the wild. Until now, few have. To make the invisible visible, Diaz injects a harmless colored dye into the water near the body of a sponge.
One of the ways we can test for the rate of water flow that moves through the sponge body is to inject a colored dye and measure the speed at which it is pumped through the sponge. Actually, for me, this is the first time I've done this, and I've been really looking forward to the opportunity for years. And I'm so excited to try this experiment. When I start seeing the color dye coming out of the sponge in less than 2 seconds from when it was applied, I could not believe my eyes. This steady and strong continuous flow of water continuously coming out of the sponge was an incredible realization of the dynamic existence of this organism.
So that's how sponges feed, and you can follow see the rest of that video in the PowerPoint presentation. So they are in fact animals, even though they have absolutely no brain, no nervous system tissues. They do sexual reproduction though. They do have cells that make eggs and sperm, and they will release their sperm into the water and it gets taken up by another sponge, recognized as something that is not food, and gets transported to an egg cell for fertilization. All right, our next group are called the Cnidaria. The C is silent, so it's phylum Cnidaria. And this is a group of soft-bodied organisms, the sea anemones, the corals, and the sea jellies. This is what a coral looks like up close, and you can see that it does have radial symmetry. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parts around a central disc. And corals live in big colonies, and most corals make what we call coral reefs, which is actually an extracellular structure that is as hard as rock, and that the corals live within. So it actually protects the body of the coral. So what we're seeing here, this reef, is a bunch of different colonies of different kinds of corals living together. And each of these little things is a coral polyp. That's what we call the individuals. Corals have a cup-like digestive system, okay? So there's one opening that is the mouth and the anus, and they use their tentacles to capture prey and pull it into their mouth. And that works for all of the cnidarians. They also have these special cells called cnidocytes, which are stinging cells. So here's a video that's going to show you how those work.
Cnidarians were the first active predators on the planet. Like its ancestors, this anemone may seem docile, but it has tricks for snaring fast-moving flesh. The goby is a swift swimmer, with eyes and senses attuned to any sign of danger and a brain able to process complex signals. It seems better equipped for survival. The anemone, however, has developed weapons of its own. Lining its tentacles are millions of special capsules called nematocysts. Inside the capsules lie thread-like projectiles loaded with deadly poisons. When unleashed, these weapons fire with the acceleration of a rifle bullet. They pierce their target and pump it full of paralyzing toxins. The tentacles must be touched before the weapons can discharge. And for that, the prey must come to the anemone. Its plant-like appearance perfectly conceals its very deadly intent. In silent ambush, the anemone awaits its prey. For the goby, one unguarded moment could be fatal. Dragging the fish into its mouth, the anemone devours it with tools invented by its ancient ancestors. The goby will be slowly digested alive.
All right, let's have a moment of silence for the little goby. But that is how the cnidocytes eat. They have tentacles. All of these and all of these. These are all tentacles that have those special cnidocytes, which are those stinging cells that shoot out those little projectiles. And those projectiles contain a poison, a toxin, that then immobilizes the prey. If you go to the beach, should the beaches reopen, if you go to the beach, you will see sea anemones in tide pools. And if you stick your finger in them, you will feel those little cnidocytes. It feels like they're kind of grabbing onto your finger. They can't actually pierce your finger, and the toxin isn't harmful to us. They can't deliver enough to harm us. So if you do that, that's kind of a fun thing to do, but make sure that you do feed the anemone, because then it has, once you've touched those cnidocytes, they do have to be grown back. So feed it a snail or something to thank it for giving you the opportunity to see what its cnidocytes are like. All right, so that's phylum Cnidaria. So we had the sponges, phylum Porifera, and we've got the Cnidaria, phylum Cnidaria. I can talk. Okay, our next group is going to have bilateral symmetry. And now from here on out, all of our organisms are going to have bilateral symmetry except this one group, the echinoderms. They actually lose bilateral symmetry. We'll talk about that in a sec. So the flatworms are a really interesting group of worms that are flat. Some of them are very small. These little planarians can be about 1/2 inch long. These marine flatworms are, say 3 or 4 inches long. Tapeworms are not very wide. They're usually only about, say, 1/4 inch wide, but they can be 20 feet long. This is a parasite that lives in your intestines. They do have cephalization. They have a very simple nervous system. They have a cup-like digestive system. In the actual worms, the tapeworm doesn't have a digestive system at all. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first I want to show you a video of these marine flatworms showing you how they swim and how they reproduce, which is kind of wild. Sorry, that's...
Flatworms have both male and female sex organs. When it comes time to make little flatworms, they have to decide who has which role. And that they fight over. The two flatworms rear up, exposing the midsections. Those germ nets aren't weapons, at least unintentional ones. They're actually large penises, a double-barreled subphylum, if they can shoot first. Flatworm sex consists of the two attempting to stab their lover with their horny pair and inseminating each other. An act delicately referred to as penis fencing. But there's nothing delicate about it. Flatworms have been known to gouge holes in each other for battles against the Echinodermata. Why do they cross swords? Producing offspring requires a lot of energy. But when you find and go out on the battlefield without any further responsibility, the losing mother absorbs the winning sperm. It must now work longer and harder to find food and stay alive. The father floats merrily along. The mother crawls along looking for a meal, already the responsible one.
I don't know how they managed to make a worm look sad, but they really did. By the way, word to the wise, if you want to see this video again, follow the link in the PowerPoint or search for flatworm penis fencing. If you just search for penis fencing, you'll get something else first. Just, you've been warned. Okay, so those are the marine flatworms, these cool things. They come in lots of really pretty colors, and like you saw, they kind of swim by moving the muscles around their body, so they sort of flutter like a ribbon. They don't have any kind of skeleton inside. They just have muscle tissues and fluid-filled spaces that they can move. So this is diagrams of the systems of a planarian. They actually are a fairly complex organism. They have a cup-like digestive system. Their mouth at the end of this pharynx is actually in the middle of their body. It's not at the head. They have hermaphroditic reproductive systems, meaning male and female organs. So here's the reproductive system. It's got an ovaries. It's also got testes. The nervous system has two simple brains at one end and then nerve cords that carry signals down through the body. They've got an excretory system, which is essentially a system that works like kidneys. And then they have the ability to regenerate. So one of the things you can actually do in a lab is you take a flatworm and you cut it in half, and each half will grow the missing half. In this case, someone cut this flatworm into 3 parts. The head grows a middle and a tail, the middle grows a head and a tail, and the tail grows a middle and a head. So you end up with 3 flatworms from the 3 pieces, which is so cool. And I'm frankly super jealous we can't do that. I mean, it would be pretty neat. All right, now tapeworms. This is what a whole tapeworm looks like. And each of these little sections is a reproductive section. The tapeworm is a parasite that lives in your intestines. And it's hermaphroditic, so each of these sections has both ovary, here, and testes all around. And these testes can fertilize the eggs in the ovary. So every single section can fertilize itself and produce hundreds and hundreds of new tapeworms. And then at one end, there is a head that, when it's highly magnified, looks like this with suckers and spikes. And that's what it uses to hang on to the inside of the intestines. And then it just absorbs nutrients through its skin, which your intestines are very generously breaking down for it. So yeah, that's a parasite that will absorb the nutrients that you're trying to eat in your food. They have been used by very misguided people for weight loss. Please don't do that. You will develop malnutrition, and you know, that's generally bad. So those are the flatworms. Phylum Platyhelminthes. Platy means flat. So this name literally means flatworms. All right, now our next phylum is Annelida, and these are segmented worms. Annel or annual means ring, and so these worms have segments, ring-like segments that go around their bodies. These include the earthworms, the leeches, but also marine worms like this one. They do have organ systems. They do have a head, although it is hard to tell which end is the head of an earthworm. They have a tube-shaped digestive system, so they do have a mouth on one end and an anus on the other, and it's all the way at the end of the organism, at the end of the tube. They don't have a skeleton. They just, again, move by contracting muscles, and they have a fluid-filled space inside the body. This is what we call a sessile worm, S-E-S-S-I-L-E, meaning that it doesn't move once it's found a place to live. The worm itself is under the ground down here. And what the worm does is it builds this hard casing that protects most of its body that's down in the ground. And then it puts out these little feet that grab food out of the water. So these will grab onto food and then pull that food down into the tube to the mouth. So the mouth is going to be down here. Okay, those are the Annelida. All right, now phylum Mollusca. Now we're getting to the really cool stuff. All right, the mollusks, Mollusca. Notice that Mollusca is spelled with a C, not a K. That's a common mistake students make. It's M-O-L-L-U-S-C-A. So this group is really varied phenotypically, but they do have a lot in common. So they're clams and mussels, snails and slugs, but also squid, cuttlefish, and octopi. Most of them have an external shell, like you can see here on the snail and on the clam. Some have taken the shell inside their bodies and it's reduced. So the cuttlefish has what we call a cuttle bone inside its body, keeps its body straight and stiff. The squid has an even more reduced bone that's a narrow little strip that we call a pen. And then some mollusks have no shell at all. So an octopus and a slug is just a snail without a shell. So both of those have given up the shell completely. All mollusks have an organ called a mantle that makes the shell. In the cuttlefish, the squid, and the octopus, the mantle is the body, the main body of the organism is the mantle. In snails and clams, or bivalves, the group clams and mussels and things like that, the mantle is a layer of tissue that extends out, puts down a new layer of shell, and then gets pulled back inside the organism. They all have a very complex nervous system with a central brain. They do have cephalization, except the clams, mussels, and scallops, things like that. They do have a tube-shaped digestive system. Snails and cephalopods, the squids and octopus, they do have a distinct mouth. The clams and mussels are filter feeders, meaning that they filter out material from the water, pull it through their digestive system, and then excrete it out the other end. But they do have a tube-like digestive system. So let me show you this video of an octopus. One of the ways that they have managed to survive without the protection of a shell is by being able to camouflage really, really well. How cool is that? So those are the cephalopods, the octopus, the squid, and the cuttlefish. And all of these, again, are part of phylum Mollusca. So the main character of phylum Mollusca is a shell, sometimes absent or reduced, and a mantle that makes that shell. All right, so we talked about the sponges, which had cellular level of organization, no tissues, but are definitely animals and do eat and do sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction just means egg and sperm fused together. It does not mean sexual intercourse as we experience it as humans. Okay, there's sexual reproduction is the process by which an organism reproduces with egg and sperm, just to clarify that. Okay, cnidarians. These are the ones with the stinging cells, the cnidocytes, the anemones, corals, and jellies. Then we had the flatworms, which are, well, flat. That's phylum Platyhelminthes, the marine flatworms, and the tapeworms. The annelids, which are the leeches and earthworms, and then the mollusks are the cephalopods, the clams, and the snails. All right, so now let's work on this next group, which doesn't seem like they should be related. It's roundworms and arthropods. And, you know, roundworms are just, they're really simple worms, and then arthropods are like insects and crabs, scorpions, things like that. Like, they don't seem similar, but they do have a really important characteristic in common. So let's start with the roundworms. Their phylum name is Nematoda. And you may have heard of heartworms or pinworms. Those are all roundworms. Those are parasitic roundworms, which live inside the body of other organisms and may harm them. A lot of nematodes are free living. There are gazillions of microscopic nematodes in really all dirt all over the world. They are practically ubiquitous everywhere in the world. One microscopic worm called Cenorhabdites elegans, or just C. elegans, is a really important research subject that we've learned a lot about genetics, for example, from studying C. elegans. And this is what it looks like. And they're actually tiny, tiny little worms. They're like a millimeter long each. They do have a tube-like digestive system. They have a fully functioning reproductive system. They have male and female. They can do sexual reproduction or asexual reproduction. So they offer a lot of tantalizing and interesting things that we can learn about genetics and how things operate. The cool thing that they have in common with the next group, the arthropods, is that they have this hard cuticle that acts as an exoskeleton. So all the other worms we've talked about didn't have any skeleton. They just had muscles that they can contract, for example, from side to side to move them around. These also have muscles, but those muscles are pulling on this hard skeleton around their body, and that's enabling them to move. That cuticle also is very, very protective. So it protects them from the world around them. So those are the nematodes. This skeleton is made up of a material that's very similar to the exoskeleton of the arthropods. Apologies to anyone who is afraid of spiders. There are going to be some more spider pictures on the next couple of slides. There is one spider that you need to be able to identify. It's this one that'll be on the next slide. All right, so the arthropods, poda means leg or foot, arthro means jointed. So these all have these distinctive jointed limbs. Most of them have 6, 8, or sometimes 10 limbs. There are some with more, such as centipedes and millipedes. All of the arthropods have a hard exoskeleton. They have jointed limbs, and they have distinct body regions. So they have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. In some of them, the head and the thorax are fused together into what we call a cephalothorax, which literally means a head thorax. And then like this is a crawfish or a lobster. The tail, what we think of as the tail, is actually the abdomen of the animal. The abdomen of these animals does not contain the digestive organs the way it does in us. Those organs are actually within this thorax. And in all of the arthropods, the legs extend out from the thorax or the cephalothorax, not from the abdomen. Okay. So be careful when you're drawing pictures. Make sure that you don't put legs on the abdomens. That would be biologically incorrect. They do have very complex nervous systems. They do have a central brain. They have a distinct head. They also have many little mini brains that are just groups of nervous system cells along their bodies. And that's why you may have heard that, like cockroaches, if you cut off their head, they can survive for a week. Won't necessarily be a week, but they won't die immediately, because even though the head is separated from the body, the little mini brains around the body can actually control the legs. Of course, it won't be able to eat, so it will eventually die. Just don't go out cutting off the heads of cockroaches, please. All right, one of the coolest of the arthropods is the mantis shrimp. So I'm going to show you a video of this animal, which is just really an amazing creature. This is from a series called True Facts, and they're hilarious. They're also biologically correct, so please feel free to watch all of them. Okay, that's not biologically correct. All right. So that's the mantis shrimp, which is one of our arthropods. All right, so I do want to talk about one spider that you absolutely must be able to identify, and that is the black widow spider here. This is the female black widow spider. The males are actually these tiny little things, and their job really, they just fertilize the female, and she usually eats them, and then that's the end of their sad little lives. The black widow spider has a really big black abdomen, very distinct legs, really thick legs. There are also brown widows in our area, which is a similar spider, but brown. The black widow has this red hourglass shaped thing on her marking on her abdomen on the downward bottom side of her abdomen. Sometimes it's not really an hourglass, sometimes it's just a red splotch. Okay, if you see a big black spider and it's kind of out in the open, it's probably not a black widow, it's probably something else. Black widows are very, very shy. You'll find them behind the tools in the garage. If you have a wood pile for your fireplace, they will be in the wood pile. They may be in the back of your mailbox if you haven't looked in the mailbox for a while. If you don't get mail every day. If you check, for example, like the water meter, that's got a little covering, they might be in there. They're very, very shy. They do not want to be bothered by you, and they don't want to bother you. All they want to do is just eat other spiders and other insects. So leave them alone, because they're doing something that helps you. They're getting rid of other bugs that you don't want all around your life. So just leave them, okay? Just let them, just leave them alone. Scare them away. She'll hide in her little corner and then come back out when you leave so she can go on eating other spiders. Okay? She's fun. Now, if you do get bitten by a black widow, that is serious, because the mandibles on a black widow can go through human skin. Their venom is extremely toxic. It is something that you do need to get emergency medical treatment for immediately. So if you are bitten by a black widow spider, you absolutely need to get medical treatment for that. If you get some sort of bite on your body and you're not sure when it happened or what it was, but later you have something that itches, you got bitten by something. It wasn't a spider. It certainly wasn't a black widow. When you get bitten by a black widow, it will hurt a lot, and you will know it. You will know it immediately. Also, it will start to swell. It'll turn very red. It will be extremely painful, okay? Then you go to the emergency room. If you get some kind of bite, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what it is. It's a spider bite. It wasn't a freaking spider bite, okay? Spiders can't bite you. All those other spiders in California, they can't bite you, okay? They're too small. Their mouth parts aren't strong enough. Their venom can't hurt you. They are not going to harm you. You did not get a spider bite, okay? You got some other insect. You may be partly allergic to it. If you're like me, you're going to get a huge welt every time you get bitten by anything, but you know what? Don't blame spiders. Okay. Now, for those of you who are like, hey, wait, what about brown recluse spiders? There are no brown recluse spiders in California. There is another recluse spider that may live in California. Again, super shy. That's why they're called a recluse. They don't bite people. This is what a brown recluse spider looks like. This is a grass spider. These are incredibly common in California. They are totally harmless to you. If you see those, just shoo them away, okay? If you see them in your house, just gather them up in a cup with a piece of paper, take them outside, put them out in a plant somewhere outside. They'll be fine, okay? They're harmless. Brown recluse spiders, they live down here in the southeast where it's hot and muggy. They do not live here. They cannot survive here. So if your friend is like, no, I was totally bitten by a brown recluse. If they weren't here, they were not bitten by a brown recluse. Okay, so no, you did not see one. No, your friend was not bitten by one. No, you don't know someone who was bitten by one. No, you haven't heard a story of someone who was bitten by one. Not anywhere here on the West Coast or in the north of the United States of America. And if you ever see someone who's like, oh my God, I had this terrible spider bite and it became this really big rash and the person ended up dying, guess what? First of all, probably wasn't a spider bite to begin with, probably was some other insect or a cut, and they got MRSA. Multiple resistant Staphylococcus aureus. It's a bacterium that can kill you if it can't be properly treated. Or you could have gotten necrotizing fasciitis, which is another bacterium-caused disease that will kill tissue. But it wasn't a freaking spider, okay? So stop bad spiders. I will move on now. Okay, so that was the roundworms and the arthropods, both with kind of a hard exoskeleton. A cuticle in the roundworms, exoskeleton in the arthropods. Moving on now. Totally cool. Okay, now the next group of organisms. We have the echinoderms, which includes the sea stars, and we have the chordates, which is our phylum. And these two, again, don't look anything alike, but we have a lot in common. All right, so the echinoderms are a really interesting group of organisms, and this includes the sand dollars. Yes, sand dollars are alive. This is what they look like when they're alive. They just sit in the sand, and they have little tube feet and fibers on their shell that they gather organic matter out of the water to eat. Sea stars, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers. I have a picture of those in just a minute. This is another kind of a sea star called a brittle star. They're called a brittle star because they break their legs off very easily and then they can reattach those. And then this is a sea basket, which is just a really pretty sea star. All of these have radial symmetry, and specifically they have pentaradial symmetry. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts around a central disc. They have a water vascular system that controls their tube feet. So they have these little feet that are filled with water and have little suckers on the end. And when they fill them with water, the tube feet extend out and suck onto something, and then they can retract the water from the tube feet and pull those feet up. So as they put feet down farther along, they can walk along. And that's what this video is. This is going to show us moving in time lapse, because they do move, but they're pretty slow. You can see down below the little tube feet stretching out, attaching and detaching, and moving around. What are these? Those are anemones, part of phylum Cnidaria. Sea stars, phylum Echinodermata. Fish, phylum Chordata. Okay. All right, so those are the tube feet. Now, this group does not have cephalization. And in fact, sea stars sometimes have little light sensing organs all around the outside, but they do have a really complex nervous system, but they just don't have a central control for that nervous system, a central brain. Okay, so those are the echinoderms. Now this is a sea cucumber, and it's going to, I'm going to mute that. It has these little tentacles that it sends out from its mouth. These are modified tube feet. And it stretches these out, picks up sand, and then pulls that sand into its mouth. This has more of a worm shape. It's long and narrow, but it is still pentaradial symmetry. So if you think of this sea star, and if you took this sea star and you stretched it out lengthwise, you would get a sea cucumber. Okay? All right, now, final phylum, phylum Chordata. This is our phylum, also the phylum for sea squirts, fish, birds, all the other mammals, and all the reptiles. There are 4 characteristics that all members of phylum Chordata have, which include a dorsal nerve cord, gill slits, a notochord that develops invertebrates into the vertebral column, and then a post-anal tail, meaning that the anus is not at the end of the animal. Remember, in the other worms, the nematodes, the Platyhelminthes, and the annelids, the mouth is at one end, or sorry, not the Platyhelminthes, they have a cup shaped. In the annelids and the nematodes, the mouth is at one end and the anus is at the other end. Okay, in phylum Chordata, there is a tail that extends past the anus. So in a snake, there is an opening that we call a cloaca. That's what a bird has too. And it's actually not at the end of the snake. It's kind of here. So a snake does have a head, a body, and a tail. Those are separate things. Okay, so these are the characteristics of phylum Chordata. And this is actually a young of this organism, the sea squirt. We've got the notochord, which is just a dense and tough connective tissue cord. The dorsal nerve cord in the vertebrates, one end is going to develop into a brain, and the notochord develops into the bones of the vertebral column. There's a mouth, pharyngeal gill slits. In fish, those actually develop into gills. In humans, they develop into some of the nerve and jaw structures and the eustachian tube that connects your inner ear to your nose, your nasal cavity. And then an anus, and then a tail that extends past the anus. So those are all of those characteristics. And in these, we actually see all of these characteristics, even though these things look like sponges. They're not. The way you can tell the difference, first of all, is that each of these things has two holes. One's bigger than the other. A sponge either has tons of holes, but usually only one big hole. And these look more jelly-like. Yeah, they're not as solid as the sponges. So these have an in-current siphon and an ex-current siphon. So they pull food in through one hole. It filters through this pharynx with the little slits in it from the gill slits. And then the water goes out the other hole. These also have, a whole set of intestines, okay? A whole gonad, a reproductive system. They have a heart. They have a stomach, and then they have an anus. All of those things. I know, who'd have thunk it? All right, but we're not going to worry too much about those. We are going to concentrate on the subphylum Vertebrata. There are 5 phyla, or sorry, not phylum. Classes. Come on, I want it. Really? You're not going to, there we go. Sorry. Let me get back down there. We've got to fix this. 5 classes. All right, within this phylum. Those classes, one contains the bony fish, which are the things you think of as fish. One contains the cartilaginous fish, sharks, skates, and rays, which have a skeleton made of cartilage. Then the birds and reptiles, those are actually in the same phylum. Yep, trust me. The amphibians, and then mammals. Okay? All right, so let's start with class Chondrichthyes. Chondro means cartilage. Ichthyes means fish. So an ichthyologist studies fish. These are fish, but their skeletons are made of cartilage, not bone. The sharks, the rays, and skates, which are similar to rays, are the 3 groups within the Chondrichthyes. They do have jaws, and they have paired appendages. In the case of these, those appendages are fins. They breathe through gills just like the bony fish. So that's Chondrichthyes. Osteichthyes, again, fish is the ichthyes part. Oste means bone. So these are the bony fish. These are fish with skeletons made of bone, and it's every other fish that's not a shark, a ray, or a skate. So pufferfish, this is the face of an eel, believe it or not. seahorses, mola mola, clownfish, all of those things, trout, those are all fish. All right. They, again, have jaws and paired appendages. Again, those appendages are fins. They breathe through gills, although some fish do have lungs and can breathe on land. Now you're going to want to know what that is. So hang on just a second and let me find a video of a fish that can breathe on land. I think this is the one I want. Yep. Oh, sorry about the ads. So this is a mudskip. All right, I'm going to stop that there. How cute are those little mud skippers? Aren't they adorable? Oh, I just love them so much. Okay, so those are still osteichthyes. And in fact, the lungs of land vertebrates actually developed from the lungs of fish, like the mud skipper, the ancient descendants, our ancient ancestors. The lungs developed as out pockets on the digestive system that could hold air. And in fact, most fish have a pocket that they can gulp air at the surface and fill with air, and then that helps control their buoyancy when they're underwater. So those got further developed into lungs for creatures that live on land. All right, so those are the osteichthyes. So we've got two groups so far: chondrichthyes, cartilaginous fish, osteichthyes, bony fish. Now, the first group of chordates that moved onto land were the amphibians. This includes frogs, salamanders, toads, and newts. They are amphi, meaning both, bio, living, that they live both on land and in water. They can breathe both with lungs and through their skin. They actually absorb a lot of oxygen directly through their skin, which is super cool, but also makes them very susceptible to toxins in their environment. So the loss of frogs and salamanders is actually one of the first signs that a wetland is polluted, because the frogs and the salamanders and the newts and the toads because they directly absorb those things through their skin, they can respond to those and get killed by toxins very quickly. Their skin does not have scales or hair, they just have smooth skin. They have to reproduce in the water. Their eggs don't have a special protective water trapping sac called an amnion. And so all of the amphibians, even if they live most of their life on dry land, they return to the water to reproduce, and they have to lay their eggs in water. So those are the amphibians, class Amphibia. Class Reptilia includes the turtles, the lizards, the snakes, the crocodiles, and birds. Birds are classified as a subclass of reptiles. We now know that birds developed from dinosaurs, and we know that dinosaurs first developed feathers not for flight, but to keep warm. And feathers are just modified scales. They're made out of the same materials as the scales of a lizard or a snake. All reptiles lay eggs. They do not have to lay their eggs in the water. So they don't require water for reproduction, which means that they are not tied to water and permanent bodies of water as a habitat. So we have lots of lizards and birds and snakes that can live in very dry environments like deserts. So those are the reptilia, including subclass aves. Other characteristics that birds have, their skin is covered with scales. The feathers are modified scales, but if you look at the feet of birds, those scales are exactly the same scales as we see on the legs of, say, lizards, and bird feet actually look a lot like lizard feet, so those are the same things. All right, now class Mammalia. This is us. Cats, dogs, bears, platypus, humans, monkeys, apes, all of those things. Mammals have hair and mammary glands, which is where the name Mammalia comes from. Please notice the spelling of Mammalia. M-A-M-M-A-1-L-I-A. Okay, please spell Mammalia correctly on the exam. M-A-M-M-A-L-I-A. 1 L, 2 M's. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Mammals also have other glands in their skin that do things like produce sweat, produce oil. They give birth to live young. Any eggs are kept inside the body, and then except for the platypus, which lays eggs, and the echidna, which also lays eggs. But those are like really weird. Just, Australia. Weird mammals, but they're still mammals because they do have mammary glands. All mammals can make hair, and even whales, which don't have hair on most of their body, they do have, for example, hair-like structures on parts of their bodies. Hair can be very soft, like the fur of kitties, or it can be really hard and long, like the quills of a porcupine. Bats have developed wings, which are a synapomorphy for their group, and the wings are actually held open by the bones of their fingers, but the wings are covered by a thin fur. The armadillo has hair modified into these plates, and although these plates are part of their skull, actually the ones on their head, they do have fur on their bellies. So those are all the mammals. And that is the end of our animal diversity lecture. So enjoy that, and I will see you all later for a review session.